Heading into year 3 of the Jerome Tang era, and the Kansas State Wildcats spent some big bucks to bring in some huge names in the transfer portal. Some would say the crown jewel of the portal in Coleman Hawkins. Super excited to discuss the Cats today. We're here with Ryan Gilbert of GoPowercat, the 247 Sports Network, our Kansas State expert. Christian here. That's Nick. Ryan, tell us what is the temperature of this Kansas State program right now? Coming off, you go Elite Eight, you missed the tournament in a brutal Big 12, and now it's a whole new roster essentially, but a ton of talent, right?
Yeah, well, first of all, guys, I appreciate you guys having me on. Love talking K-State hoops whenever I can. Yeah, you mentioned the Elite Eight in the first season for Jerome Tang, and obviously last year was kind of just set up for failure with the whole Naquan Tomlin incident, with him getting kicked off the team before the year had even started, and then Quez Glover, who was maybe not a starter, but a sixth or seventh man off the bench, certainly. He's out for the year with an injury. And so, K-State, I think here in year number 3 for Tang, we're going to find out which year was the fluke. Was it that Elite Eight year in year number 1, or was it last year? And I think most people believe that obviously last season was just one to forget and move on from and sort of be that fluke. But Jerome Tang, still kind of has to go out and prove on the court here that this transfer portal class can live up to its expectations. I know that there's a lot of confidence that it can. But obviously, with a bunch of newcomers coming together, there is going to be some gelling there that has to go on. But there's a lot of confidence, a lot of momentum. And you mentioned the NIL and stuff. Jerome Tang and his program are in a pretty good spot right now heading into year 3.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Naquan Tomlin and Quez Glover. Quez Glover was more of a low-key thing. I feel like that didn't get the attention it needed because you're right. That was a big deal. And a lot of K-State last year was – just so much weight on Tyler Perry and Kaluma and Cam Carter's shoulders, right? And, the defense was there, the home environment was there, the overtime success was there, but just the talent and the fun aspect of basketball that we saw with Noel and Keontae and even guys like Ish Masood, who as a weight guy and seeing him at Georgetown, he was nothing there, but he made some amazing plays in that tournament. And that's another reason why I have so much confidence in Tang, is I feel like he gets the most out of his players. Nick, what kind of fits are you most excited to see play out on this roster?
For sure, Ryan. So I guess my biggest question lineup sermon-wise is, do you think Tang is going to go big with Hawkins at the 3 and a core at the 4 and on Enzo at the 5? Or do you think he's going to play Coleman at the 4 and then slide in another guard at the 3 position?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know if we necessarily have that answer yet, but Coleman Hawkins, you look at what he did at Illinois, certainly a great player. K-State reportedly obviously spent a lot on NIL to get him, but out on the wing, he wasn't great. And that's really why he moved down to the 5 with the Fighting Illini, just because his turnovers weren't great. His assist to turnover 2 years ago at Illinois was the worst in the conference. And so if Coleman Hawkins wants to play out there at the 3, he's certainly a versatile, capable player that can do a lot of different things with the ball in his hands, with that scoring, passing, all that sorts of stuff. Coleman Hawkins is capable of doing that. But, Jerome Tang does have a pretty big rock. And you mentioned Ugonna and Achor, right? Those are big players. And even guys like Buddy Rich, David Gasson, that maybe people don't talk about a whole lot, big players. And so K-State, if it wants to play big, certainly can. But there's also a lot of depth at the guard spot as well. And so it's a little bit of a dilemma for Kansas State. So not to give you, Nick, a cop-out, but I just don't know if we really know what this team is going to do yet. Jerome Tang has always said that he's not necessarily married to a starting lineup. And so things will probably change throughout the season. But that's one thing that, with Coleman Hawkins, the number one question mark surrounding him certainly is probably his turnovers and maybe, I guess, lack of ball skills out on the perimeter. Kansas State's number one issue last season was turnovers. They were, dead last among power schools in that regard. And turnovers were just a huge, huge, huge issue for this team. So Coleman Hawkins, have him play out at the 3. That'd be great. But if that's the case, he's going to have to, take care of the basketball. But I know Hawkins, one of the reasons he wanted to leave, and this is, speaking of Ish Masood, it's like he didn't want to play the 5 at Wake Forest, right? He wants to leave and play, where he really wants to be as maybe a smaller player and not be a power forward. I think the same thing can be said for Coleman Hawkins as well. So we'll see what happens.
Cool. You mentioned Buddy Rich. You didn't mention Bay Fall, who is someone
I'm
I
not.
wanted to ask about because he was, a very highly touted recruit at Arkansas. Did not, see much action at all. And I'm just looking at this roster, and David Castillo's a guy who might be the 11th guy, and he's a guy that I know is super talented. Like, there's a lot of depth here, which is always a great thing that you want to have. But then, I guess the question becomes, minutes distribution when you're bringing in all these transfer guys, right? Like, how do you kind of keep everyone happy? Who is the leader in a sense? Because to me, I look at this roster and I'm thinking Doug and Coleman are the clear leaders, and like they will play a ton of minutes. But do you see like, Ingasan as the guy who's been here and like was there on that tournament success team? Like, where does he fall in the pecking order to all these guys? Like, do you think this is a team that does go 11 deep? And like, how do you think all those whether it's egos or just the chemistry, how do you think it will come together?
Yeah, there's only so many pieces of the pie to go around, right? And it's going to be tough. David Gasson, I personally don't know if I was the head coach if I would have him in this starting lineup, just because there's so much talent on the roster. But you got to remember, this is David Gasson's COVID year, so to speak. He came back for this one extra season. It'd be hard if you're Jerome Tang not to start him, right? Just to like, as a reward, like, thank you for coming back. So, that's tough. David Castillo, you mentioned that depth. Jerome Tang and this staff have raved about him early on throughout the summer and early in the fall here. So he seems like a guy that can get in there. Bayfall, I think maybe might be a year away. And there were some guys that Kansas State added early, CJ Jones, Max Jones, that I can't imagine those guys were overly thrilled with some of the bigger transfer names that came in. And so, obviously the pecking order will sort of work itself out, but certainly this team has some depth. But we saw it in 2022, Jerome Tang's first year. Kansas State didn't really have a play with a deep roster, so to speak, in that Elite Eight run. It was pretty much 7-8 guys, and that was it. So I think it'll probably work itself out. This staff is never going to pressure a player into a red shirt. It's always going to be that player's decision, but it might be, in the best interest for a player or two to maybe do that and work on their skills, because we saw it last year with a guy like Jerome Colbert, who did redshirt and came in and started for half of the Big 12 games for K-State last year. So we'll see.
So it's hard not to want to make parallels between Doug and Marquise and Tyler, right? And obviously Marquise was just an incredible player and like on another level in March, like maybe the story of the tournament, right? And then Tyler Perry, I feel like just with the lack of things going around him, like a lot was on his shoulders. And I think Tang tried to make him into that role of a point guard who's going to be ball screen dominant. You're going to have to set guys up and have Tyler Perry's assist numbers went up from who he was at North Texas, but like Doug McDaniel comes in, like that's what he does. Like he runs ball screens and he sets guys up. And I'm really excited about what Doug McDaniel can do for this team. My one concern is the Michigan stuff with the academics thing. Like it was kind of weird. Like, is there any fallout from that or any concern of that? Or are you drinking the Kool-Aid and is everyone drinking the Kool-Aid that Doug McDaniel is going to be, not saying he's Marquise Noel, but a guy who can average 7 assists a game and take better care of the basketball than those two guys did too?
Doug McDaniel's excited to just play point guard. Michigan was bad. They won 8 games last year, right? And so Michigan, he was asked to do everything, score, facilitate, you name it. And so I know McDaniel's gone on the record and he said that he's excited to be a point guard and not just be asked to score, but facilitate an offense, set up his open teammates. And so McDaniel's excited for that. You talk about Tyler Perry. I don't, not to knock Tyler Perry, but I don't know if he was a true point guard. That's not what he's necessarily meant to be. I think Tyler Perry is ultimately better at the 2. And so the success that Marquise Noel had at the point guard spot in Tang's first year, I think the staff was like, okay, we got to get the next Marquise Noel. And Marquise Noel and Tyler Perry were just kind of different players, right? So I don't know necessarily if McDaniel fits one side or the other, if he's more like Perry or if he's more like Noel. I'd probably lean Noel just because he, again, is a guy that, is quick, electric, and he wants to lead and facilitate an offense and not just score the ball. McDaniel, in my opinion, guys, has not gotten enough, I guess, hype or recognition around him because he was K-State's first commitment out of the portal, I believe. It was very early on, obviously, like in April, and so you kind of just you kind of overlook him. And when you have a guy like Coleman Hawkins with the reported NIL numbers there, it's easy to forget about a guy like Doug McDaniel. And so he's going to be a prominent player on this team. He's all but locked up that starting spot at the 1. And so if K-State wants to have success, we saw that with Jerome Tang in his first season, it has to start at the point guard spot.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to go off that and say, I label Tang as a defensive coach. You look at Baylor's numbers since he's left the program. They ranked 107 last season and 72nd the season before, and Tang was 39th through his tenure with Baylor. Would you say that this is the best offensive team he's had since he's been at K-State? I would say yes. And if you agree, I think that the defense is just, it's going to be there. So it's more so just the offense clicking and, getting better. And, like we said earlier, lessening the turnover count because previous 2 seasons that's been bad in that department.
Yeah, top to bottom, certainly. I think in year number 1, I don't know if McDaniel and Hawkins will match the firepower that Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel had. They might. They could be those superstars, but, those guys were special. I mean, they were special players to cover. So I don't know if at the top, I don't know if K-State's necessarily as top-heavy as that roster was, but top to bottom, the depth on this team, guys, we've talked about it. It's going to be tough to give everybody their minutes and keep everybody happy. This is a deep team. So, yeah, certainly it does start with defense. I know it's super cliche to say, but if you're not hustling on defense, you're not going to play for Jerome Tang, right? He's mentioned, Jerome Tang is always maybe a little not mysterious, but he likes to keep us guessing. He'll say players need to buy in. He'll say stuff like, not explicitly saying maybe why a player is not playing, but he'll give us hints and stuff. And so I think a lot of that does, kind of just root back to effort, of course, defense. And so, if you want to play with Jerome Tang, you got to play defense. And so, but yeah, back to your point though, top to bottom, yeah, this is, certainly one of K-State's, if not the best K-State roster that Jerome Tang's had in a short time here.
You look back at last season, there's a stretch, January 24th to February 19th, K-State lost 8 of 9 games, the only win being at home against Kansas. And I mean, it's such a gauntlet just playing in this Big 12. Of course, it's going to look a little different here with some new schools added. But it was a tough year. And I think even the fact that, and I know he gave that impassioned speech at the end, like explaining why they deserve to be in the tournament, even though they weren't really on the bracketologist radar. But like, I was so impressed. They were obviously a good team in the sense that Jerome Tang got as much out of them as possible, and they were not an easy out in the Big 12 because of how well they defended. Like people didn't enjoy to play them, and they could beat really good teams on any given night. And that's why, as Nick gets to, like, I feel like it's just a given that this team's going to be good defensively. Like whether it's Doug or Housen or guys that maybe don't look like they would be, the best defenders. I just feel like with the rim protection behind them of Onyenso, Hawkins' versatility, Achor is a little bit more raw, I guess, or just not playing at the high D1 level. We don't know exactly what he will be, but like he has the athletic traits to be switchable, in the front court. Man, I just think it's a really interesting team because if the defense is there like we expect it to be, and you have a creative point guard and versatile forwards, and then like both the Joneses, like we haven't really talked about them, but like they seem like kind of just bigger versatile guards who can give you a little bit of everything. And then Housen is a sniper, and like that just reminds me of that role that Masood kind of played of like he just kind of came in the tournament sometimes and like he would be a few steps behind the line and just launch it. And like Housen brings that element, and I don't know. I think there's a lot of exciting things at play with this team. I'm very excited about this team. So I guess I'll transition that into predictions. Where do we think this team falls in this loaded Big 12? I think this is at worst like a top 7 Big 12 team. I think there's a really high ceiling if the defense is there, if the egos of whether it's Hawkins or Doug are managed, and there's just buying this program. But like, look, this team's 29-4 the last 2 years at home. Like, it's going to be a tough place to win in the Big 12, and when you have the defense that travels and a good point guard and experience, like there's a lot to love about this team.
Yeah, first of all, regardless of what I think, I mean, without a doubt, the standard, the expectation for Jerome Tang is to get to the Final Four. And so that was, last year, all throughout the offseason, early on in the season, it was get to Phoenix, right? Get to Houston, where the Final Four was the year before, right? That's what they were always talking about. And so I'm not necessarily placing that on them, but within that locker room, that is what they expect. That is their standard, is to get to the Final Four. The Big 12 is going to be a gauntlet. There's no doubt about that. And before Coleman Hawkins arrived, I would have said without certainty that, Kansas State's a tier below your Kansases, your Baylors, Iowa State, Arizona, Houston. But now with Hawkins, I think Kansas State, the door is open to fight for that tier 1 in the Big 12. I don't know if Kansas State will get there. I mean, there's still, obviously it's a deep roster. We've kind of raved about the strengths of these players, but there still are some question marks. With a guy like Ugonna and Yenso, can he score? He's a great rim protector. Can he score? Can Coleman Hawkins take care of the basketball? Guys like Brendan Housen, can he do more than just be a sharpshooter? David Castillo, if he's playing prominent minutes, can he be as mature as you want him to be as a true freshman? So there's still question marks. There's still stuff that I'm sure needs to be worked out in practice and stuff. But, Kansas State certainly to make the NCAA tournament, in my eyes, is kind of the floor for this team. Something would have to go, wrong, majorly wrong, like what happened last year, off the court issues and stuff. But, I think they can compete for that tier 1 in the Big 12. I don't know if K-State has enough firepower to really win the league, but, without a doubt, man, getting to the NCAA tournament and trying to make some noise in there is very attainable for this team. And we saw how hot Jerome Tang's teams can get in March, like we saw with, of course, Noel and Masood Johnson, all those guys. It was a lot of fun out there. And so they can get there. They just have to obviously, have to make a big improvement from last year. But last year, of course, most of those players are gone. There's only a David Gasson and then Buddy Rich, I guess, a little bit, played a little bit, but, it's a whole new roster. But K-State, you mentioned it, Jerome Tang believed his team was on the bubble at the end, when in reality, Kansas State was not really close to being on the bubble. But Kansas State, even that being said, Kansas State was 8-10 in the Big 12. You look at those overtime games, though, give all the credit in the world to Kansas State for winning those games. All the credit in the world. But K-State just goes 500 like a normal team probably would in all those overtime games. You're looking at a disastrous season. So credit K-State for winning those close games. But it could have been a lot worse than it was last year. So, I'm sure Jerome Tang and his staff maybe looked in the mirror a little bit and thought, what can we do better? And we're going to see that here in year number 3 for them.
100%. Final thoughts, Nick?
Yeah, it's insane that what Tang's done in overtime. I mean, the guy's never lost. Kansas State in OT at 12-0, and his home record, I believe, is 29-4. Just super impressive stuff, man. I think Kansas State goes dancing this year, like you said. I think they make a nice run this season, and I'm excited to watch some K-State hoops this season.
Yeah, we've made a joke. I mean, don't win it. Kansas State doesn't have to win it in regulation. Just don't lose it. As long as you're tied or have the lead, you're going to win the game.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ryan. Very insightful. We're super excited about this team, and hopefully we'll be in touch as the season goes along. Best of luck with everything.
Yes, sir, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
Yep, thank you.